So, our first presenter is going to focus on benchmarking mine energy data to reduce emissions and cost. Michelle Levesque is Senior Engineer, Mining Energy Efficiency with Natural Resources Canada, and she's currently employed at CanMet Mining as a Senior Engineer in the Mine Mill Energy Efficiency and Underground Mine Environment. In this role, her main focus is on the development of energy efficiency opportunities within the mining sector, resulting in the implementation of techniques and technologies leading to a more sustainable mining sector.
So as Adrian mentioned, my focus is on trying to find technologies or develop tools for saving energy, and by saving energy, you can result in saving carbon emissions in the mining sector. So when I started looking at different tools or programs to develop, I started looking at other sectors and what they were doing in terms of finding solutions for saving energy or motivating energy management efforts, and there's quite a few sectors that are using benchmarking, and so this is an example of benchmarking an article that I found that was published for the building sector, and how they were using it to motivate energy investment or energy management efforts to reduce their emissions and their energy consumption. So I thought, this would be a good opportunity to see if I can develop a program for the mining sector. There's really two different types of benchmarking that I thought could be useful for the mining industry. So there's internal benchmarking, which is basically where you assess your energy performance over time. And then there's external benchmarking, where you would compare your performance against a peer group. There are some examples of some benchmarking programs, external benchmarking programs for industry. Some are have been developed by the U.S. Department of Energy, and they're called the Energy Star EPIs, or Energy Performance Indicators. They've developed some indicators for different sectors, but they haven't developed one yet for mining. And another example of an external benchmarking, and this one here specifically for the mining sector, and back in 2005, NRCan-sponsored study, SIPEC study, to benchmark energy efficiency. So one study was conducted for benchmarking in underground mines, and another one was conducted for open pit mines. So here's an example of the one of the figures that was published in the SIPEC report for benchmarking energy in underground mines, specifically Canadian underground mines. And what we see on this is the energy intensity for 11 mines in Canada. And the energy intensity here is represented in kilowatt hours per ton of ore hoisted. But the problem with the information that was published in that report, beyond being outdated now, is that there was no further information provided to explain the differences between the performances at these sites. Because we can see that there's quite a bit of range between the lowest and the highest. So it could be, it would have been useful to understand if these mines were at different depths or different climates, or if they were using different mining methods. So these are some of the considerations that I kept in mind when I was developing the benchmarking program. So here's an example of what could be considered an internal benchmark for an underground mine. This is a case study that I conducted when I was back doing my grad studies. And it's using data from Goldcorp's Musselwhite mine from 2001 to 2009. And what we can see here is by representing the performance indicators as kilowatt hours per ton, and the kilowatt hours in this case here comprise of all of the energy consumed at the site, so electricity, diesel, anything that they were using for heating. And what we can see here is that the trend is, over time, their energy intensity was increasing. So by using these types of indicators, it's difficult for a mine to try to demonstrate that they're actually improving. So what I started doing is looking at other factors that could be affecting consumption. So I considered production. I also considered the mining depth and the climate. And by developing a key performance indicator, by including all of those factors in the denominator to normalize the energy consumption, we're able to demonstrate that actually over time, this mine here was improving on its performance. So again, this is something else that I've considered when I was developing the benchmarking program that I'll be showing to you shortly. So having all of these different concepts in mind, I started looking at benchmarking and what kind of programs we could adapt to benchmark energy in the mining sector. And I came across an article that was published by Stephen Letwin from IAMGOLD, who was talking about a benchmarking program that they were putting together to benchmark production costs for precious metal miners. And so they had partnered with other companies and a software developer and were developing this tool. And so last year at this very conference, I met with Tony Moreau, and he showed me the program that they were developing, and I thought that it had great potential to be adapted to be used for benchmarking energy. So over this past year, I've been working with other stakeholders, and so we've got a good group of different mining companies who have been providing feedback, because I'm developing this tool for the sector, for the mining sector, so I wanted to get some feedback from the users to make sure that what we were producing would be useful for them. So the examples that I'm going to be showing in the next slides on how this tool works are all related to underground mines, but I just wanted to highlight before getting too far into the presentation that although, like I said, I'm going to focus on underground mines for this presentation, the tool can be used for surface mines, and it could also be used for what we call dual mines, which is a site that has both an underground and a surface operation all in one. So when we were working at developing the list of inputs that would be useful, we listed different types of energy. So we can look at diesel, electricity, renewable energy, heating fuels, etc. So those are all entered into the program individually. And we also have built-in conversion tools, which is if you click on the little orange link on the side, it converts to kilowatt hours, so that all of these types of energies could be entered into liters or cubic meters and converted using this conversion tool to kilowatt hours, so that we can get a total amount of energy consumed at site. So after the energy data has been entered into the system, we've included some other factors that could be used to understand or that could affect energy consumption in mines. And we have different lists for underground mines than we do for surface mines, because there are some different factors that would contribute to energy consumption in these types of mines. What I'm showing here is the underground ones, and we've included things like production, meters developed, mining depth, and also an indication of climate that could affect the amount of heat that'd be required in an underground mine. Then the list goes on with other inputs, and realizing that this might be require a lot of effort on the user's part, we've basically categorized the inputs into some that are variable, but then others that we've considered static. And what I mean by that is that they wouldn't, there is a chance that they could change, but they don't change very often. So in order to reduce the amount of effort on the, from the user's perspective and data entry, what we've done is we have some that are considered static. So the user would enter these values at the start, when the first time that they use the system. And then in subsequent periods when they go to update their information, these fields would be pre-filled using the data from the previous quarter. So I forgot to mention, the data is entered on a quarterly basis. And so by having these fields pre-filled, it just reduces the amount of time that is required on the user's part for data entry. But it doesn't mean that they can't change. So the user would just look at these and say nothing's changed, or this one is changed, and they make the correction, and then it just facilitates the entry. And then again, we have another list of static entries. These entries are not numerical, so they can't be used to normalize, but what they can be used for is for filtering and getting a more focused analysis, if you want, when you're doing at the analysis stage. Now, just to make sure that people feel comfortable entering their information in here, it's all confidential, but it's also we've included a two-factor authentication system to make sure that the data is secure. So you have to, when you log into your system and you want to look at your data, you'd have to use a username and password. But in addition to that, you have to use a PIN that's generated using a token, and it's a unique number. Every time that you push the button, you get a number, and then that's what you would use to log into the system. So we've the tool that we're basing this on had customized reporting or analysis functions, and really what I liked about the platform that we based on is that it allowed a lot of flexibility for the users in terms of how they want to analyze or assess the information. So the users aren't bound to specific key performance indicators that are predefined in the system. Really, it's up to the user to decide on what they want to be looking at. And so what you would do when you're doing your assessment is you would pick whatever input that you used from the list of variables that you've entered as your numerator, and then you pick, again, from the list of inputs what you would like to look at in terms of your denominator. So that's how you would define whatever KPIs. So it's up to the user to decide how they, what they feel that they want to look at, and how they want to be assessing their information. Now, having realized that really this is a central repository of all energy-related information, I've been talking with the developers and thinking about developing some templates that could be used to facilitate routine reporting requirements for energy-related matters from the mining sector. So that's something that we're considering, and I think would be an added benefit of using this tool. So here's an example of what type of output that could be generated from this system. This is not actual data. This is just hypothetical that I've created or entered into the system just to illustrate the type of outputs that can be generated and how they can be used to assess your energy consumption and try to find opportunities for reducing the amount of energy you're using and corresponding emissions. So on this slide, I'm showing the natural gas consumption at a site with the shaded area. And not showing up very well, but hopefully you guys can see the shaded area. And I'm comparing that to heating degree day. So in this, if a user wanted to look at other combination of variables, it's up to them to pick from the list that of inputs that have been entered into this platform. So the heating degree day basically is a measure of the demand for energy that you would require for heat, and it's based on the difference between a reference temperature and the outside temperature. So as the outside temperature gets cooler, there's a greater demand for heat. And so this type of information can be used for analyzing trends. And I'm showing here 10 quarters, so roughly 2.5 years. And what we can see is that as the heating degree days go up in winter, so does the natural gas consumption. But in this case, in the second year, although the heating degree days was slightly lower, the natural gas consumption was increased. So this could be an indication that maybe there's some maintenance that should be done on the burners to try to make sure that we're bringing the performance back to where it was in the previous year. So this is another type of output that can be produced using the system, and this is where the user could generate key performance indicators with using any combination of variables that were entered into the platform. Now here I'm showing a kilowatt hour per ton, and I know I said that it might not be useful to demonstrate improvement, but that would be like on its own when it's only used as an internal benchmark. But in this case, what I'm showing here is my mine, which I don't actually own a mine, but my mine would be shown in red. And the blue line is the peer average from the average from the peer group. And so what this type of information can tell me, although it doesn't tell me that I'm on its own, like I mentioned, that I'm improving in performance. What it tells me is it gives me a comparison of how am I doing compared to the peer group or the average of the sector. And what I can see here is by looking at the slopes of these lines that my energy intensity isn't increasing as much as the peer group. So it gives me an indication that we're doing something right at the site. I've also included in this platform the ability to develop multivariable key performance indicators. So in this case, I'm using, again, the same example that I used for the Musselwhite mine, which was kilowatt hour per ton meter and heating degree day. And like I mentioned previously, this could be useful for demonstrating improvement in an internal benchmarking. But what this does is it combines it with it's a combination of internal and external benchmarking all in one, because I've got my variables that I'm using to normalize my energy intensity with. So I can demonstrate that my mine, shown in red, has been decreasing in intensity over time. But I can also compare to the average of from the rest of the sector. And so what we can see here is that I've been improving when the sector was relatively flat. But comparing to the average may not, it's useful, but we took it a step further. And this is the same type of information I was showing on the previous slide, my mine in red and the average in blue. But here what we're doing is we're providing an indication of the distribution of the peer group. And we're showing that separated into quartiles. So what we can see is not only how are we doing compared to the average, but how are we doing compared to the rest of the sector. And it's all done anonymously because we can't tell who's who on this. We can only see, I could only see my own mine. And what the type of information that we can use this to really to tell a story with could be like if, let's say I started using this in the first quarters, and I could use this to compare my performance against others and find that, oh, I'm in the bottom quartile here. And so I could look at, it would reveal an opportunity really for improving. And so after I've identified where I stand compared to others, I could look at implementing best practice measures on energy conservation and implementing some energy management projects, over time demonstrating improvement, and then, at the end, it could become a leader in energy in mining and be within the top performers in the sector. So I hope that I was able to demonstrate to the miners in the room the benefit of using this, and hopefully we can get a lot of participation and people signing up for this, because the more people that we have, the better we'll have, the better representation of the sector, so it'll provide for a better comparison. Thank you.